Good evening and welcome to the Chevy MyWay studio. I'm Shannon, a product specialist here at Chevy MyWay, and I'll be your host as we head to North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte to Hendrick Motorsports. We've got a great segment from Dr. Eric Warren, who heads up Chevrolet's NASCAR competition team. He's going to give us an insider's look at the all-new and much more advanced NASCAR Next-Gen Camaro that was just introduced. Eric, thanks for being with us, and I know you've also got some special guests with you today.
Thank you, Shannon, and I'm glad to be here today. Welcome to the Team Center at Hendrick Motorsports. We'll have some great guests that I'll introduce in a minute. But we're here today to show you the first look at the all-new NASCAR Next-Gen Camaro ZL1, which will be our race car for the 2022 NASCAR Cup season. Several decades of testing different aerodynamic configurations, suspension designs, different systems on the car, the teams, the OEMs, NASCAR, and the rest of the industry decided it was time for a new race car. Having a clean sheet design allowed us to tie features of the production Camaro ZL1 much more strongly to the race car. And what a great foundation the Camaro ZL1 is. It's a coupe body. There's great aerodynamics built into the car for track-ready performance. There are features such as advanced cooling with air extraction through vents in the hood that also transfer over to the race car. There's a small block V8 driving the rear wheels, which makes it a great performance car and not a front-wheel drive sedan. In addition to having a great foundation for a race car, we have a great foundation in our key partner teams, which are Hendrick Motorsports, Richard Childress Racing, and Chip Ganassi Racing. In October of 2019, Richard Childress Racing and Austin Dillon drove the first NASCAR Next-Gen car at the test at Richmond International Raceway. Since that time, Richard Childress Racing has played a critical role in the development of the Next-Gen car, performing all of the prototype testing with NASCAR and other teams. Chip Ganassi Racing and Kurt Busch tested several times at Charlotte Motor Speedway and the Charlotte Roval to work out a lot of the detailed systems of the car, such as the steering. Additional tests by William Byron at California and Alex Bowman at Martinsville have continued to push the teams in the development of the next-gen car as part of the wider industry. Additionally, as part of that partnership, all the teams really got together to design a great NASCAR next-gen race car. The aerodynamic groups worked tightly with GM and Chevy engineers and designers on the design of the Camaro body, but also working together on the systems really has brought the key partners together to build a great NASCAR next-gen Camaro that we're excited about racing in 2022. As we give you the first look at the NASCAR next-gen Camaro, we'll talk about a lot of key features in the car, and we'll also get some great perspective from one of our team Chevy drivers. Let's go over some of the highlights of the next-gen Camaro race car. The lower roofline creates a much more streamlined and aerodynamic greenhouse that, combined with the shorter deck lid, improves the downforce of the car. The small block V8 still drives the rear wheels, and the front of the car has advanced cooling like the production Camaro. Air coming through the nose is extracted out of the hood with active hood vents similar to the production Camaro. As we look at the other features of the car, one of the more striking features are the larger wheels, 18-inch diameter wheels versus 15-inch diameter in the current generation. Also looking at the car down the side of the car, one of the things that's new with the next-gen car are the exhausts that are now coming out of each side of the car versus just out of the right side in the current car. The car is also symmetric, so each side of the car is a mirror image of the other, left and right. And as we look at all those features, these are all shared with a production Camaro. And with our next guest, we'll talk about each one of those in a little more detail. I'd like to introduce Chad Canals, Vice President of Hendrick Motorsports. Chad, with 7 Cup championships and several championships before that as a crew member, there's probably no one more qualified to talk about a Chevy Cup race car than you. Give us a little bit of your perspective on how the development of the car started, how the teams work together, and it'd be good to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it was a very fun project, obviously, being able to get together with the key partners, with General Motors and Chevrolet, and take this concept that NASCAR put out there and really start to put it into what is the ZL1 Camaro. And it was a lot of fun, obviously taking in the aerodynamic effects, the body structure, and the overall confines that the NASCAR's put out there has been a fun project for us, and I think we got a pretty cool product.
So let's start at the front of the car, take the small block V8 driving the rear wheels, but tell us about some other features of the car that are kind of different from the current race car.
Yeah, one thing that's really exciting for me is in years past, and Eric, you know this really well, we struggle with the cooling of the car. We bring a lot of air into the front of the race car. It all goes into the underbody of the car and we lose downforce. Well, with this current car, we've done some really neat things. You bring the new air in through here, it goes through the cooling system and it actually exits over here on the top of the hood. And what that does, instead of impeding downforce, you actually gain a little bit of downforce, which is a really neat concept and something that the teams are looking forward to. The engine manufacturers really like that, right? Because you have lower operating temperatures, which ultimately may increase your horsepower a little bit.
Now this car is fully composite, so talk a little bit about the differences of how that would have potentially affect over the weekend or repairs of the car.
I think it's going to help tremendously. Through the practice sessions, through qualifying, we see the drivers will, occasionally get into one another, maybe hit the wall, some things that are bad, right? And one aspect of that that's really cool is we can actually take and the nose is one component, the fenders are another component, the doors, the quarter panels. Being modular like that is really great. Another part of this that's pretty interesting is the front bumper construction. The way that it is all integrated into the front clip, being an aluminum structure with a foam barrier in between there, the safety aspects are really high. So we can have a front end impact, change the front bumper assembly, change the front nose assembly, and maybe not impact a whole lot of the chassis. So that's some good forethought from GM and what Chevrolet and NASCAR has put out there.
So you can't see it looking at the outside of the car, but also in modular, the chassis can be broken into different sections. Talk a little bit about that and how that's going to be totally different for the industry.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really cool because right now we build the whole chassis and it's a front clip, a rear clip, and a center section. It's all welded together. When you have damage, you've pretty much destroyed the whole race car. So the front chassis part of this car is bolted on right here at the firewall. And the rear chassis is basically the same thing. And what that does is, once again, at the racetrack, you may be able to not replace the whole race car from a frontal impact. You might be able to just take and break it off right here, unbolt it, slide a new part on there, and get right back onto the racetrack.
Two other big systems that we've all worked on for many years are the steering. The recirculating ball steering that we've have in the current car. It's hard to really get dialed in and really connect the driver to the racetrack. Talk a little bit about rack and pinion and how that's been a kind of a big development to get that right and what that could imply for the car going forward.
I think it's going to tremendously help the feel and the feedback to the drivers. The current steering box that we use right now, there's probably a lot of people out there who've never even felt what that feels like. The production of those components on a street car ended probably in the 80s, right? So rack and pinion steering is something that's been around for quite some time. The direct link to the driver's hands, he's gonna be able to feel the steering wheel, feel the tire and the contact patch on the asphalt, significantly better than what they had in the past. So I think it's gonna be a huge advantage to these guys.
All right, so let's talk about one of the more visible features of the car. The new 18-inch wheels versus the 15-inch wheels, and they're forged aluminum just like the production Camaro.
Yeah, I think that's a huge advantage to us. I think from a couple different levels, right? I think from a styling concept, it looks way cooler, right? Also, there's a lot of performance to be had with that. The steel wheel, obviously heavy, retains a lot of heat. You don't want that in a race car, right? You want to try to get the heat expelled out of there as much as you possibly can. So the larger wheel really helps with that. Obviously, we've got a lot of open area that we can get the air out of there to keep the brakes a lot cooler. One thing that's really obvious straight away is the mono lug as opposed to the 5 independent studs and lugs that we have on our current cars. The other thing that's really great is the braking system. The rotors are significantly larger, and what that does is that allows us to get the car woe down and the driver slow the car down without generating a lot of heat and really allowing them to have a little bit more of a feel with the car, coupled with the rack and pinion steering. It's going to be pretty neat to see the drivers react to that.
We've seen some of the testing. There's about 25% more capability, and it's really easy for the drivers to lock the brakes up. So taking advantage of that capability without locking the tires up or hurting performance is going to be a key thing that crew chiefs and engineers are going to be working on.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And for the duration of the event. We see a lot of times now that the brakes degrade over a course of a race. We may not have that problem with this car.
So looking at some of the other features as we move down the car, another one of the more visible things and one of the more noticeable things are the fact that the exhaust comes out both sides of the car. Talk to us a little bit about the right side in the current generation and the previous generations.
Yeah, so I think the fans are going to audibly hear this change. And the reason is because when you have your exhaust exiting out of one side or the other, you're hearing all 8 cylinders, man. They're just kicking and firing off. Now you're only going to hear 4 cylinders if you're standing on this side of the car and 4 cylinders if you're standing on that side of the car. But what that creates is a much more throaty and performance-based sound to it. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Also, the exhaust is encased in what's called the rocker box. So once again, an aerodynamic feature of this car is the smooth area underneath the exhaust pipes, which helps us create some downforce. Another thing that the teams are going to continue to keep working on.
So the next feature, the transaxle, is a combination of the transmission in the current car and the rear gears. So that's new from the driveline standpoint, but also the independent rear suspension. Let's talk about that versus a production Camaro, and then what a big change it is to the industry.
Yeah, I think this is another important aspect of this car in general. We're trying to make sure our relevancy to the production car is high. Our fans can identify with what it is that we've got. They started the independent rear suspension on the street cars in the Camaro in 2010. Okay, well, finally we're there. And the things that allows us to do is your independent rear suspension, you can adjust your toe, your camber settings, you can really kind of get finicky and real finite with your adjustments to make sure that the driver's happy and you're actually making acceptable changes to the actual racetrack that you're going to, because they're all different, they're all unique. The other thing that's really cool about it is we're able to run now a full underwing underneath the race car due to the independent rear suspension. That's a huge aerodynamic advantage. And one of the things that I think the drivers are going to be able to feel, because as you go around the racetrack, as the car travels, and as it goes into different yaw situations, they're going to know what that underwing is doing.
One of the key features of the underwing is closing off the chassis. Over the last several years, teams have spent a lot of money trying to develop the aero side of the chassis. So it's one thing when the teams and NASCAR got together, we wanted to make the chassis be suspension and structural and take the aerodynamic part of that. So we put an underwing on it, but that's going to give itself new opportunities that ought to be exciting of how it affects the car. Car also runs a lot higher off the ground. That was one of the key features, and I think that'll be visible to the fans as well.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And the stability thing is what we want to be able to give these drivers. So all of the aerodynamic enhancements, all of the independent rear suspension, the rack and pinion, all of those things are just there to make sure that the drivers can aggressively race these race cars.
Another one of the big changes in the car is the rear of the car and the symmetry, looking at it from the rear. So we have the lower roof line, more sleek greenhouse. Let's talk about the symmetry of the car and the effects of that.
Yeah, so one of the things that fans really don't identify with is why we do what we do to race cars sometimes. And you'll see on a current car, we really shove the tail and the bumper of the car to the right-hand side. So when the car goes into what we call yaw in the middle of the corner, it's got some stability to it. Well, it doesn't look like a production car, once again. So what we wanted to do was get it to where it looks more like a production car, get the car more symmetric. And you are really gonna see that once this car hits the racetrack. It's gonna look different for the drivers, the fans in the stands, and the fans on TV. You're really gonna see these new styling cues, which look just like the regular street Camaro.
So the other part of the car that's new, that's going to be unique to NASCAR, that's common in other race series, is a rear diffuser, which is how the air exits from underneath the rear of the car, which is going to affect the aerodynamics a lot and really going to affect how the cars behave in traffic that we're going to learn a lot about.
Yeah, you had mentioned it earlier, Eric, about the ride height limitations that we've got with this car. So one of those keys is to make sure you're feeding this diffuser with air. And the more air that you put underneath there, the more it's going to be effective, and the more you're going to get that air evacuated from underneath the race car, which creates that downforce that we're always searching for. So with the spoiler, how it creates the low pressure, the diffuser, how it creates the low pressure and gets the air evacuating off from underneath the race car, you're going to have a lot of downforce with this race car. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, let's move and talk about the inside. One of the things that fans will see is there's going to be a new data package and new capabilities inside the car so that every car on the racetrack could have an in-car camera, and also there'll be potential other data in the future that could enhance the fan experience. So now we've talked about all the technical features of the car in detail, and we could talk about it all day, but let's hear what a driver thinks about it in his first experience with our next guest. Next, I'd like to introduce Alex Bowman, driver of the legendary number 48 Chevrolet, and fresh off the recent win at Richmond.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, hey, you and I had an opportunity to take this thing up to Martinsville and run it around up there at the test a couple weeks ago. Give me some first impressions. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely different, right? It's going to take some getting used to. Just kind of every aspect of it is different. The interior of the car is different. How you apply the brake pedal is different. So much more braking capability. Sounds different. So it's going to be fun to kind of learn about and develop and get used to.
How about the steering? Do you like it? Does it feel pretty good?
Yeah, it's another different thing that it's so different than what we've been used to for so long that it's just going to take some getting used to. But I think once we get it dialed in and everything, finished product at the racetrack, it's going to be really good.
Yeah. So Chad, talk a little bit about the Martinsville test, what we were there for, kind of just different parts about tire testing, for example, and how many laps we ran there.
Yeah, we ran a bunch of laps. Unfortunately, we did have weather impede us a little bit, but Alex did a great job. Straight away, hopped in the car, started making some really good laps. We were there trying to collect data. Obviously, that's what we do from a race team. We get the driver in there. He gives us his feedback of what he's feeling, but we're looking at the computer, right? We're trying to figure out what's going on. So we gathered a lot of intel over many, many laps up there, which is going to be definitely valuable to us going into next year.
So I know all of us are part of the sport, but what do you think fans are going to think about the new look and the different features of the next-gen Camaro?
Yeah, I think it looks great. Obviously, it's a great-looking car. Looks a lot like the street car, which is really neat. But, I think the bigger wheels are really cool. I think the exhaust is going to sound really cool. So I think fans are going to love it. I hope they do. I think the racing is going to be really great as well, which I think that is probably the thing I'm most excited about, is just being able to take these cars and put on a great show for the fans.
You brought up the exhaust, right? So we know, they're coming. It's coming out right here. So we know the fans are going to hear it a lot differently. I can hear that, but inside the race car, what does that sound like? Do you still get the same audio cues that you would typically get from the car today?
Well, the tone is definitely different. I'd say all the audible cues are still about the same, but the tone's different and it's just louder. Since that exhaust outlet is basically right underneath our head, it's quite a bit louder inside the race car, but I think that's pretty cool.
Thanks, guys, for joining us today, Alex and Chad, and good luck to both of you and Hendrick Motorsports for the rest of the 2021 season.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
And it's great when the Chevy on the track looks a lot like the Chevy in the showroom, and we're excited about the next-gen Camaro for the 2022 season. And I'll pass it back to you, Shannon.
Thanks, Eric. The new next-gen Chevy Cup car looks great. It'll be great to see it race next season, but there's a lot of racing left this year. Good luck to Team Chevy this season. We're cheering you on from the Chevy MyWay studio. And if you are interested in taking a further look at some of Chevrolet's performance vehicles, like the Corvette Stingray convertible or the Camaro SS, you can take a live one-to-one tour at Chevy MyWay 7 days a week. Just visit Chevrolet.com/MyWay to book your tour today.
Lee Johnson Auto Fan.